teacher voice. Am I okay up there, Mary Ellen? Can you hear me?
You're great.
Thank you. Today is the first session in a multiple scheduled session for the construction of the 2015-16 school district budget. My name is Jeff Hicks and I'm the superintendent of schools. We're going to break this presentation into 3 chunks, and if you just want to make note that we have handouts here with all of the information for the presentation, and we have a dedicated web page on our website. If you go to our home space, it's the second link down in the left-hand navigation bar that will have every piece of information that we present on the budget from now until the board actually adopts it in April. So we're going to talk a little bit about where things stand from a revenue and expense standpoint in terms of the district. The governor put out his executive budget proposal last week, and we're going to review what we know of the governor's executive budget proposal, and then we're going to end with a couple of quick slides on where we stand so far early in this particular budget season. The Board of Education really has a philosophy when it comes to constructing budgets, and it's based on these 2 overall goals: protecting the core programs of the district, what opportunities need to be available for Clarence kids, where do we want our district to be, and exhibiting fiscal responsibility with tax dollars, understanding the tax fatigue in the state and in the nation, and being transparent in terms of communication on how every dollar is spent in Clarence. So we take this philosophy and we start the budget process by working through some revenue estimates and some expenditure estimates. And I just want to talk a little bit about the climate of the last 4 or 5 years, the recession that we are hopefully coming out of, and what has happened from the revenue and expense side, not just to Clarence, but to every school district across the state. In 2009, we began this Great Recession that limited funding to schools, and we've never fully recovered from it. Even though we had some temporary federal help, the aid has dropped over 10% between 2009 and 2011. We did have some temporary bailout money when President Obama first became president, and that was exhausted in 2011. In 2011 and 12, a cap was put on state aid growth, and it was also put on property taxes. Since that time, the state has calculated aid to the school districts in terms of what we would actually receive, and then taken it back through a method called the gap elimination adjustment, and that has significantly reduced the amount of money that would normally have flowed from New York State to Clarence over the past 5 years. Just as an example of that, the amount of money that we get from New York State is 18% lower this year than it was in 2008-09 when this year's senior class was in 6th grade. So that's difficult to overcome from a revenue standpoint. Since the inception of the gap elimination adjustment, it has hovered between $2.5 and $3.5 million of aid that had been promised but never delivered. And in grand total, over the 5 years of the gap elimination adjustment, Clarence has been promised a little over $16.3 million of aid from New York State that has never been delivered. And we've had to make up that gap in a variety of different ways. The property tax cap puts a limit and constrains the amount of revenue that a school district can raise locally. Clarence has kept property tax increases very low over the past 7 years. I'm going to venture to say the lowest, certainly in Erie County, and possibly in the entire state. We have been at the level of the property tax cap each year that the cap has been in existence for the 3 years that it's been here. There's been some limited action from the state on mandate relief, but there have been many new expensive mandates that have been foisted upon us by New York State, and we have not gotten any additional money for them. The 2 largest being the implementation of the Common Core and the new evaluation system. So just to give you a little visual about the rest of the state and then how Clarence stacks up. This chart shows from 2004, 2005 until this year how tax levies across New York State averaged out and how state aid to school districts averaged out. And across the state, the average increase before the cap was 2.9%. The average increase after the tax cap is 2.4%. But you can see that the blue line trends downward. School districts were in the process of lowering property taxes even before the tax cap came into existence. And since the time the tax cap has come into existence, they've continued to decrease. State aid, on the other hand, has fluctuated all over the place. Some years it's more than the tax levy, some years it's much less. This is how Clarence compares similarly to that particular slide. From a state perspective, Clarence does much better. Since 2008-2009, the 7-year average of spending, which is a year-over-year budget increase, has been 1.4%. And we've been at the level of the cap the last 3 years. The 7-year average of tax levy increases in Clarence is at 1.4%. Again, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say this is absolutely the lowest in Erie County, and it's one of, if not the lowest 7-year average in New York State. So Clarence has exhibited fiscal conservatism even before the tax cap. On the expense side, salary and benefits make up 75% of school spending. Everybody knows that. And when we get into a situation of having to make reductions on the expense side, there's really two ways to reduce personnel costs. We either employ fewer people or spend less per employee. In some ways, over the past 4 or 5 years, we've mitigated some of the expense increases through contract negotiations, which is something that the district controls. Administrators and service employees froze salaries. Administrators actually froze their salaries for 2 of the past 3 years. Teachers took a half of a step, which would be a normal scheduled increase in the first year of their new contract, and they froze the money on the steps for the last 2 years of their contract. All employee groups in Clarence now contribute more towards health care, a minimum of at least 10%. Also, through the hard work of Dr. Patak and the school board, we have created a self-funding mechanism for healthcare, where the rest of the region increases healthcare costs by 10 to 15% per year. Our self-funding initiatives have hovered between 5 and 7%. And this past year, they were even a little bit lower than 5%. So we have done some things to try to mitigate cost expenditure increases. Some things we've done through efficiency measures as well in the past 4 or 5 years. We share a transportation supervisor with Akron, 2/3 time in Clarence, 1/3 time in Akron. We have a variety of different cooperatives that we purchase things through, and it's much cheaper to do that than to purchase these items on the open market. We purchase school insurance and workers' compensation payments and cooperative purchasing for utilities and other things through the cooperatives that are listed on the slide. Also, because we have not received the kind of state aid that we were promised, we've had to make reductions in personnel in order to deal with the expense side of the school budget. Since 2011-12, there has been 113 people reduced in the district in terms of employees, for a grand total of about $8.2 million in expense reductions. So from the revenue side, we've had some challenges, and the biggest challenge is the amount of money that the state provides to us, because we are really capped, and we're committed to staying within the tax cap locally. From the expense side, we've done almost everything we can think of to try to mitigate expense increases. And we're trying to do even more through some contract negotiations this year. As far as programs in the school district, for 2015-16, we would like to have the same essential goals as we had last year. no staff reductions, maintaining all of our existing programs, and if the state comes through, like they're supposed to come through, we would even like to consider perhaps making some additions to our staff, bringing some things back that maybe we have cut in the past. We can't commit to that yet because we don't know exactly where the state aid is going to land. The capped tax levy alone will not provide us with enough funds to restore personnel or programs. We'll really have to count on larger increases in state aid in order to bring things back that the district has cut over the past 4 or 5 years. State aid is at an unknown at this point, and it might remain that for quite some time, which makes it a little difficult to plan. Usually at this portion of the presentation, I want to brag a little bit about the accomplishments of Clarence students, because that's what everyone's tax dollars go towards. This is last year's graduating class, these particular statistics from our last year's kids, or in some cases, this year's kids who are on the verge of some great things. Last year, we had 66% of our kids get an advanced designation diploma. That's the advanced Regents diploma, the higher diploma, the better standard for college and career readiness. 99% of our kids attended either a 2- or a 4-year college last year. I think that's the highest percentage that we've ever had for a graduating class. We have a nationally recognized music program with 30 performing groups and over 1,600 kids. We have over 60 elective course offerings in our high school. This year, our Academy of Business and Finance will graduate its first cohort of kids. Last year, Project Lead the Way had 43 graduates into a certified pre-engineering program. We teach 19 advanced placement and 12 college-level courses in our high school, even with the reductions that we've had. We have 69 sports teams with over 1,700 participants and over 60 extracurricular opportunities at the middle school and high school, all of which were restored in this year's funding after being funded by our foundation for one. So that's a pretty impressive list that not many school districts can offer. When you look at comparative information for Clarence, where does Clarence stack up in terms of other school districts regionally across the state? Business First, our local publication, not only ranks Erie County school districts, the 96 or so that are in Erie County, it now ranks every school district east of the Hudson River, or I'm sorry, west of the Hudson River. Thank you, Rick. And there are 432 districts in that pool. So how does Clarence stack up? Well, Clarence has the 3rd best overall cost effectiveness of all upstate New York districts. And the 2 districts that are ahead of us, I think, are appreciably smaller than we are. Cost effectiveness meaning the total program that we offer students and the total spending per pupil. We have the 6th best administrative efficiency in all of Western New York, which is the ratio of administrators to kids. We have the 6th lowest spending per pupil in New York State and the 2nd lowest spending per pupil in Erie County. We're the 7th highest rated school district for college readiness in upstate New York. That's the number of kids who get a 85 or better on a math Regents exam and is it 75? Kristen, how many? 75 or better on the English exam. We have the 2nd lowest full value tax rate in Western New York, and probably close to New York State. And we have the 3rd highest academic ranking in Western New York as well. Again, these are some pretty impressive things that your school district does with the kids who are here. And we do it in a very cost-effective way. There have been groups that, prior to the time the governor released his budget, called for increases to state aid, and it's worth kind of looking at what those groups have talked about. The state Senate has called for a full restoration of the GEA, the gap elimination adjustment. That would cost someplace in the neighborhood of $1.9 billion to be done in 1 year. The state Senate is in favor of that, including our Senator, Mike Ratzenow. The Educational Conference Board, which is a group of 5 or 6 advocacy groups between teachers associations, superintendents, school business officials, New York State school boards, they recommended $1.9 million or $1.9 billion to keep schools operating at the same pace as last year. The Board of Regents recommended $2 billion in general operating aid increase. New York State has a surplus of money from lawsuits on the big banks in Wall Street. They have a $4.2 billion surplus this year. Costs are projected to increase at about 3% overall, which really means that when we limit the amount of property taxes to 2% or less, notwithstanding the exclusions, it's good. We have to count on the state to provide the kind of money that's necessary to bring programs back or increase program size. Since the recession began in 2009, there have been 30,000 teachers that have been laid off statewide. And in Clarence, it's close to 70, I believe, in total. So it's really critical for us to talk to our state legislators this year, get the budget done on time, and give us the information that we can use in order to build our budget. So that's it for where our challenges were for expenditures and revenues. Now I want to talk a little bit about what did the governor come out with last week, because it's very unique. First, the governor proposed $1.1 billion in state education increase in spending. That's an excellent start. That's a much higher start than where he's been the past 3 or 4 years. But it's not as high as what many of the groups have recommended based on their analysis of the budget. You saw that it was between $1.8 and $2 billion for most agencies across the state just to maintain the status quo. But this is a really good start point, especially prior to the time the legislature gets their hands on it. However, what the governor did was he made the payment of school aid contingent on passing a series of legislative reforms. And if the legislature does not pass these series of reforms, the governor is not going to give us any money whatsoever. So there would be a 0% increase. No state aid budget runs for the first time that I can recall ever in the history of the governor releasing his budget. So we cannot even guess what the state aid to Clarence would be in a highly accurate way. We're going to have to try to take a ballpark estimate. When we don't get state aid runs, it's very difficult for us to estimate state aid for our budget construction. And we cannot calculate the tax cap until the governor gives us some type of state aid run for 2015-16, even if he was to say 0 as an increase. So we have to wait to calculate the tax cap, and we can't give it to you tonight until we get all this information from the governor. If we were going to get rid of just the gap elimination adjustment, that would be almost the amount that the governor has proposed in his opening budget. That would mean $2.8 million for Clarence if they gave it back to schools in the same manner that they took it away. That would be a very good year. It would allow us to do many good things. And we wouldn't have to raise taxes to do it. Last year, when it was all said and done, the governor and the legislature agreed to $1.2 billion in education aid. So the opening for the governor is very close to where the close was last year. Normally that would be a very good sign for school districts, especially for Clarence. But with all of the strings attached to the governor's budget, it's not such a good sign this year. The governor wants to change the teacher evaluation system, and he wants to change the system for low-performing schools. And he's holding state aid hostage to do that. So let me talk a little bit about what we know that the governor wants to change. He wants these legislative changes to take place prior to the time he releases the funds for a budget run, which would have to be prior to April 1st. This would be a miracle if all of these things could be approved by the legislature prior to April 1st, and some of them are not such good ideas to begin with. But here they are. First thing is the governor wants to change the teacher evaluation system that actually the governor created just 2 years ago. He wants to eliminate all local exams from teacher evaluations. Right now, about 80% of the teachers in Clarence do not teach a course that ends in a state test. So they use local tests that they've created in order to come up with scores for their evaluation system. If all local examinations were eliminated, those teachers who taught courses that did not end in a state test would have to use the average of those exams that were administered for the state in order to calculate this teacher evaluation score. It would be difficult to do, and it would be contrary to what the original spirit of the APPR was all about. What the governor would like to do is take state tests and make it worth 50% of the overall teacher evaluation score. Currently, state tests are worth 20% of the overall teacher evaluation score. Now, the state tests are not the greatest thing since sliced bread to begin with, and in some ways they are unreliable, and doubling down on the amount of state testing for teacher evaluation is probably not an educationally sound idea. The other 50% would be the result of classroom observations. Right now, classroom observations make up, in Clarence, about 30% of the overall score for a teacher. But what the governor has said is only 15% of those observations could be done by the building principal. The other 35% would have to be done by independent evaluators, either a principal from another building, or somebody from another district, or someone from a college, something like that. The state education department would set the scoring bands and the parameters of the evaluation framework. Right now, those are negotiated between the district and the Teachers Association. A teacher would have to be rated effective in both the state test portion and the observation portion in order to receive a score of effective. Teachers would have to get 5 consecutive years of effective in order to be eligible for tenure. Right now, teachers can get tenure in 3 years. A master teacher program would pay those teachers who were rated highly effective a $20,000 bonus from the state. Teachers would have to be provided with improvement plans, and a teacher could be automatically terminated after 2 consecutive ineffective ratings, which is not exactly the way that it is right now. This would change something called 3028 law in New York State. So all of these things would have to become law before the governor would release money for his executive budget. Some other things that would also have to become law before he would release the funds. We'd have to increase the reimbursement rate for charter school kids, increase the total number of charter schools across the state by 100, and allow charter schools to teach special education and English as a second language students at the same proportion as local public schools do. The governor wants a special manager appointed by the state to go into those school districts that are failing and take them over, kicking out the superintendent and the school board. Now, we're not failing, so that wouldn't happen. But there are some districts in and around us that are close to failing, and this is what's proposed. Another proposal is a tax credit. If a person makes a contribution, not paying tuition, but if a person makes a contribution to a private school, a parochial school, or in our case, if someone made a contribution to our education foundation, they may be able to get a dollar-for-dollar tax credit on that up to $100 million. A little detail on this one. And the governor would like to spend $27 million to provide college tuition for the children of undocumented immigrants. So if all of these things pass, the governor will release his $1.1 billion. If they don't all pass, he will not release anything. That is his proposal. On top of that proposal, the governor has also increased his concept of a property tax credit. This is known as a circuit breaker property tax credit plan. This is in addition to paying people the difference, like the governor did last year, on their school tax bill from the previous year to the current year. This would cost $1.6 billion in total, and it would be paid for out of the surplus that the state has from all of the lawsuits on Wall Street. Essentially, this is what it says. If your property tax bill is in excess of 6% of your income, you can qualify to get a rebate of up to $2,000 depending upon how much money you make. So you would take the amount of money that you make in a year, multiply that by 6%. If that number was higher than the property taxes you were paying, you would be eligible for a rebate or relief up to at least 50% of that total.
Total property tax?
Total and school tax.
School tax.
So if you had a very expensive home, and you paid a lot of property tax, this would fit depending upon what your income level was. Or if you had an inexpensive home, this one would fit depending upon how much property taxes you were paying. What the governor estimates is that people in Long Island and Westchester who qualified for this would get about a $1,200 average rebate. People in upstate New York would get about a $750 average rebate based on these figures. Okay? So the legislature would also have to pass this, in addition to all the other stuff, in order for the governor to release the $1.1 billion in school. That's where it stands. So obviously, we would like the governor to work on these things on his own through the legislative process, and then go ahead and release the school aid, rather than making it contingent on releasing the school aid. So we're going to lobby hard, our state senator Mike Ratzenhofer and our state assemblywoman Jane Corwin, to not make these things contingent. So where do we stand in Clarence on January 26th in the first draft of our budget? Well, we have to make some assumptions when we create this first draft of our budget, and these are the things we're assuming. Number one, and we want to re-emphasize this, because this is a major goal of the Board of Education. We want the tax levy to be at the cap level. We don't know the exact cap level yet, but what the board is pledging to you tonight is that we will not create a budget that is above the tax cap level. So the first thing is, we will be at the level of the cap. Second, we don't want to have any budget reductions of any kind, including staff reductions, from last year's budget to this year's budget. That's another assumption that we're making in these numbers. Third, we know that Medicare revenue, which we get for eligible students who fill out the paperwork through special education services, we know that's going to increase slightly in our budget, so we've put that in. We also know that the pension costs for teachers and administrators is going to go down pretty significantly, and we've built that into this budget. We know that our debt service is going to go up because we refinanced a major debt last year, and that refinance, the first year of it kicks in. Now, we will get accompanying state aid to offset some of that debt refinancing, and in the long run, we're going to save about $4 million by refinancing that debt, but it will be something in our budget that exists. We built in about a 2% increase to buildings and grounds and transportation and expenses. We've been pretty close to zero the last 2 years there, and we need to build some things in. We built in a 5% increase in healthcare expenses, which is a conservative estimate, but based on our self-funded system, we think pretty accurate. And we're going to use a combination of the state aid that the governor gives us and some of this miscellaneous revenue to stay within the tax cap for 2015-16. Also, the administration, that means me and Rick and John, we are recommending that the Board of Ed consider purchasing buses again this year as a separate proposition. But the board has not yet made any decision on that. We're just recommending. So those are the assumptions. If you throw all those assumptions into some numbers, this is what the budget, the preliminary first draft budget for Clarence would look like. Last year's budget was $72.5 million. We are estimating, early estimate, very early. We don't know the actual number, and we can't get the actual number until the governor releases the state aid run. But we are estimating the tax levy increase at about $1.9 million. That means we'll need at least $429,000 from the state in order to make this budget balance. And that would be a $74.9 million budget for 2015-16. Okay? That's the very early estimate of where we stand, and we will continue to modify this in each of the budget presentations that we do over the next couple of months. Oops. In addition, this year, the governor's tax freeze credit that was initially created last year should kick in if the school district does these two things. In other words, if we stay within the level of the tax cap, if we are at or below the level of the tax cap, which we have pledged to do, everyone should be rebated the difference between what they paid in school taxes last year and what they will pay as an increase this year. If we do these two things. Number one, we stay within the tax cap, which we are definitively going to do. And number two, we put forward a plan to save 1% of the tax levy in each of the following 3 years. We are working with Erie One BOCES. We've generated a regional plan, which you're allowed to do. We are well within the 1% threshold. We think we can do that for 3 years in a row easily. So as long as the governor keeps this in, and he made it a law last year, any increase to your taxes should be rebated to you. Okay? So that's very good news. Where does that leave us? Well, on February 23rd, we're going to have another one of these, where we talk about what has changed between now and February in terms of the governor's budget or any other anomalies or weirdness that comes out that we need to talk about. On March 30th, we're going to do it one last time. On April 13th this year, the Board of Education will formally adopt our budget wherever it is at that point. On May 11th, the week before the vote, we will have the traditional public hearing. And on May 19th, it's the statewide school budget vote date, and we will hold that vote right in our high school auditorium. So that's the 30-minute quick version of where we stand with the school district budget so far for 2015-16. What we're really interested in is hearing any community input. So this is the time where anyone who has any input.
Well, this is an excellent presentation. That's my first input.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson.
How many students, what is the student population, projection of student population for the district?
Right now, we're about 4,600 kids. In February, we're going to give a full accounting of enrollment. Okay? We are slightly declining.
Another question, let's see, one item you mentioned. Something about something that isn't being, are the pension increases, are they subject to the property tax cap? I guess that's what I was thinking about.
Normally, the pension, if pensions were going up, which they are not, okay, they're going down, appreciably down. But if they were going up, and they went up higher than 2% total, the percentage above 2% would be allowed to be excluded from the property tax cap. That is not the case this year. They went down, so pensions are not going to have an impact on the property tax cap. Am I correct with that? Correct?
Well, the TRS is because of the retirement plan has gained so much money from the stock market. Is that right? So you don't need to raise taxes to pay for the pensions.
TRS made a return of about 23% last year. They did pretty well.
23%.
Yes.
It's amazing. Okay. Another question, one more on here. Now, this is interesting about these teacher evaluations. We talk about people coming in to observe. Who sets the standards for these evaluations?
Right now, there's a negotiated framework document that is a rubric of sorts. It's a scoring device that's utilized by building principals or other administrators when they go in and observe teachers.
Oh, I see.
And that was mutually agreed to between the Teachers Association and the district.
So that's a standard document that already
It's a
exists.
standard document.
I see. And on the last item, it talks about struggling teachers will be provided with teacher improvement plans. This is present policy now, I would
It is
expect.
present, yes. And in the current teacher evaluation system, if a teacher had received, there's 4 different categories at the end of the year the teacher can be put into: highly effective, effective, developing, or ineffective. If they were put into the developing or ineffective category, they would, by rule, have to receive an improvement.
I don't understand the, Cuomo said everybody's being rated so high,
Right.
but if the standards are there for the ratings, I don't, what is his difficulty with that? I don't understand, that seems to be inconsistent.
It would be difficult for me to read the governor's mind.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if I want to, but we don't think the evaluation system is necessarily broken in Clarence. Certainly it can be improved. But I'll say we, I don't want to say that we have the board. I disagree with the governor's premise that public education is broken in New York State. By virtue of what you saw here, public education is not broken in Clarence. And should there be some changes to the teacher evaluation system? Yes, but we can probably work those out with our teachers, rather than having them be imposed by the government.
Yeah, because you always hear this story, these horror stories, you can't get rid of a bad teacher.
That is incorrect.
That's incorrect, yeah. No, I was just very pleased. I mean, with 4,600 students, and you have more than 1/3 of them involved in music, and more than 1/3 involved in sports, so the activities programs seem to be pretty successful in getting involvement from the kids.
Thank you, support of that, Mr.
Yeah.
Patterson. Any other public comments?
I have a couple. So in our draft there, we have a tax levy increase estimated at 1.9 million.
Correct.
As a percent, what is that exactly?
It's about 4.5 as an early estimate.
So it's a little bit higher than we've had in the past few years. That's because of bond issues.
Part of it is our estimate of those exclusions for those bond issues. Certainly, it is an estimate at this point in time because we don't have any aid bills.
Now, we're going to have some more discussion on the bus proposition.
Yes.
I think, I'd like to, at this point, I'm thinking, well, we piled on the taxpayers this year with the capital project. We did a bus issue last year. I'm wondering if this would be a good year to give the bus proposition a pass. At this point, that's the way I'm leaning, but we'd like, obviously, we'd like to hear some more.
Sure. And in the February meeting, we'll bring you any and all information that's requested on the bus proposition.
I just have one more. Under the executive budget proposal synopsis of very last, a 1.2 billion increase in education aid. What is that on a percentage basis?
It's about 4.2%.
It is, not much.
From last year to this year. Yeah. It's right around what the governor did last year. And normally, that would be considered a very, very good start.
I see.
Okay, any other ones? In response to your comment that public education is not broken in Clarence, obviously this board would also agree with that. And also, we would not want to take the credit for the number, exclusively the number of kids that are involved in music, arts, athletic programs. It also goes to the families and the teachers and the administration of the district. We don't do this alone. We're all in it together. Okay, anyone else? Okay, our next board meeting is February 10th. Okay? 9 o'clock.
February 19th.
Okay, I Clarence Center. Okay. A motion to end the evening? Okay.